Він включається чи не весь?
Да, проходите сюда, поближе, правильно.
Ну, все мікрофон робить. Тільки не дуже кричить. Хто буде читати? Бачите, особливість, воно трошки в іншу сторону.
Так.
Обратно.
Все садимся, пожалуйста, садитесь. Прошу вас еще раз выключить телефоны. Пожалуйста, если поговорить, то очень тихо или лучше выходить, потому что вы мешаете другим послушать. Да? У нас будет синхронный перевод, я надеюсь, у всех есть эти наушники, вы готовы. Господин Кіршке будет говорить на английском языке. Садитесь, пожалуйста. Это мы потом по имя. Извините, можно это предложить? Вы сейчас... Таким образом, пожалуйста, господин Кіршке, он будет говорить о международной торговле и формировании национальной аграрной политики в Украине. You have the floor, Mr. Kіршке, please.
Thank you very much, Volker Lasse. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are not yet too exhausted by now. Having heard all these different presentations, this will be the final one. So thank you for staying. Thank you for your interest in this topic. I would like to give some ideas on my presentation, and I hope that then we will have some intensive discussion on your ideas, on your comments, on your questions, on the matter concerned. So I'm very much pleased to present these ideas to you. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Kіршке. I'm now what is called in English emeritus professor. I still have to get used to that. I'm not out of office for quite a long time. I have been for many years professor for agricultural policy at Humboldt University of Berlin. And our field has been policy analysis and international agricultural policy issues. I have been involved in cooperation with the National University of Life Sciences and Environmental Sciences of Ukraine for many years. And we are currently working in cooperation projects with the APD in this trade project concerning the free trade agreement association with the European Union. The audience is too big to let me know all your names and your backgrounds personally, but I would like to get a quick overview on your background. Who actually is a PhD student at whatever university? Raise your hands. Okay, few. Who is a master's student in whatever university? Raise your hands.
Якщо хтось писати буде.
A few is understood. Here who are bachelor students of this or other universities, raise your hands. Most of them. Two more questions. Who has come across with somehow economic topics, who is studying something of agricultural economics? Raise your hands. These are only few of you. And if I'm asking you who has come across the topic of trade economics, trade policy, I'm going to talk about, please raise your hands. Okay. By the way, who are colleagues and teachers of me? If you could identify yourselves. Oh, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. It's the end of the day anyway, so we can have a discussion. Okay, folks. This is the topic, international trade. and national agricultural policy making in Ukraine. And the question I'm talking about is, what can we say? What does theory, what does economics tell us on national agricultural policy in the context of trade? A very simple issue, a very important issue. That's your issue. You are an export-oriented country, but that's a crucial issue for any country. I would like to present to you some ideas just on three to stress a little bit, repeat a little bit for most of you on the idea of comparative advantage, the so-called gains from trade. Why do we believe in this, and what does that mean for policy making? So my second topic is, what is the framework for national agricultural policy making in your country, in any country, in the context of trade, in the context of comparative advantage? And the third point, based on my experience, based on my discussions, what I think are key policy aspects related to trade and national policy making, my issue. So I'm not talking about the memorandum or the landmarking and all these kind of issues, very important issues, but I'm focused on policy issues related to trade and policy. Well, that's my introduction. Brief question to you. Is it okay with my presentation? Is it translation? Is it too quick? Or is it okay right now? Can we proceed like this? Everybody is following, either in English or Ukrainian? Okay, it's good. Let's go ahead. So let's start with my first point, comparative advantage. This is not an economic lecture, just a brief summary. I think everybody knows that trade is nothing else than division of labor, and in an international context. So economists believe in division of labor for many reasons. It makes the best use of scarce resources, and it enhances the income potential of a country that we call welfare. This has not been realized for many reasons in the past. Protection was the key policy issue of the past, and that simply means the support of domestic producers. This is, you will know, the old EU story, and to a certain extent it still is. And this is a story on agricultural protection in developed countries. And this is a story of international trade policy making under the WTO. So that's, I would say, the old but still present story. Today, many people think that this is a story of the past. And I think most people are of the opinion that protection is no longer a policy option for any country, but think of President Trump. I think what we're discussing right now. So is there some certain fallback in this whole discussion? And what will happen in the future still is a very interesting realization is very simple, and I don't want to explain this. But I mean that somehow a division of labor, that you don't produce and consume everything at home, that you don't have a competitive advantage, but that you use exports to import, that's the basic issue. And it can be shown that this actually increases income of countries. That's one thing. Just to remind you, trade also means that there's an effect on prices. Trade also means that the domestic price is given by the world market price. not by domestic supply and demand, but by international prices. Trade also means that a country that opens up has to follow world market prices. You have experienced this in the past. If world market prices go up, national prices follow. That has been the story of 2007, 2008 in international markets, and also, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago. They are going up and down, and domestic prices are following. We also know if trade is good, is a good policy option for the country as a whole. It is not good for the groups altogether. So if prices go up, that's good economics, that's good for producers, bad for consumers, and if prices go down, it's the other way around. For your country, this is well known. We don't have to elaborate on this, but we have to keep it in mind. We have also to keep in mind that comparative advantage is heavily influenced, for instance, by exchange rate. The devaluation of the hryvnia has a drastic impact on domestic prices. They go up, I'll come to that later, which is good for producers and bad for consumers. So the policy framework of free trade, as it is acknowledged by many economists, by many people, has of course implications for groups, for consumers, for producers that might not be wanted politically and that might ask for intervention, for policies. And this is what we have to problematize, that we have to pick up again. But I don't want to elaborate on theory anymore. I want to turn your attention to an example, what we can observe. Old protectionism, like Trump, America first, America produces, this is well known from. These are arguments from Germany, for Europe, and the most popular proposition is, okay, trade may be a good thing for economic purposes, but there are other things beyond economics. There's food security, there is, most of all, sustainability. What about that? And one popular proposition of many peoples in my country is, trade may have a negative impact on sustainability. So that's a totally new argumentation, but we discuss it a lot, and if we give classes, we have to see and explain what this means. I personally would like to fundamentally challenge this proposition, and there's in fact much evidence that trade might be a good thing for welfare, but it might also be a good thing for a proper use of scarce natural resources from a national and a global point of view. And I don't want to go into detail or into theory of this, but I would like to illustrate the point with the recent topic of public debate in Germany for 2 or 3 years and in Europe, just to illustrate what the way of thinking of people, the new way of thinking is to deal with trade issues. And this is the discussion of the so-called EU protein gap. Ever heard what this means? I'm not sure whether you might be that familiar as an exporting country, but the EU in fact is exporting pig meat or wheat. It's a big exporter, but it is also a very big importer of protein for feeding animals in Europe. And the import of pure protein is about 50 million tons per year in Europe. That's about the quantity of wheat that you have exported last year or something like that. And mostly these protein imports in Europe, they come from soybeans and its meal from South America, but also from North America and from Ukraine. Well, a lot of soybean production area is needed outside Europe to provide European consumers with meat and milk. No doubt this is true. And in view of this fact, some people suggest in Germany, in the EU, well, let's cut down high soybean imports. Let's I would like, sorry, I forgot to switch that on, but I explained. I would like to invite you to think for a moment what this would mean if we were to enhance domestic protein production in Europe. That definitely wouldn't be the soybean, but it would be the broad bean, or as we also sometimes say, the field or the horse bean. The protein yields per hectare, however, are about 1/3 lower than for soybeans at the Rio de la Plata. By the way, this is why we import protein from the Rio de la Plata and from Ukraine. We simply don't have a competitive advantage producing protein in Europe. So what would a total replacement, just thinking at this option for a while, what would a total replacement of soybean imports mean? We would need roughly more than 20 million hectares of broad beans cultivated in the EU. That would amount to almost the total wheat production area that we have right now in Europe. And as a consequence, we would switch from a marked exporter of wheat and some cereals to a drastic import. What would be the worldwide consequences? Well, EU wheat and cereals production loss would have to be covered by production somewhere else in the world. Wheat and cereals yields outside the EU, however, amount to only about 50% worldwide. Protein import substitution of the EU would thus free land for soybean production outside the EU, but require almost 3 times as much land for wheat and cereals production in worldwide in the area. Economically speaking, and this is what the example is about, we would see a drastic violation of comparative advantage. We would see a heavy distortion of national and global production and trade and a reduction of welfare. Can we seriously expect that such a disrespect of economics and trade is good for sustainable agricultural development? And here I come back to the beginning of my example, and I would come to the next point. What can we conclude from that for national policy making? In Germany, in the EU, but also for Ukraine. I have 3 propositions as a starting point, as a base for any national policy making related to trade. First proposition. Agricultural policy making must start from a clear understanding of competitive advantage and trade opportunities for a country, whether it's Germany or Ukraine. Second, trade interventions should not be misused as a replacement for proper policy making at home. And my third point is national policy making should be based primarily on the idea of free trade and not countering. What follows from these basic propositions? Well, it follows, for those of you who like theory, what is well known in trade policy analysis and welfare analysis, if we look at trade intervention, so if we want to tax or subsidize imports or exports, the clear classical welfare economics answer would be don't do that, because it brings down welfare, it brings down the income opportunities of the economy. So no trade intervention is the best policy from this simple point of view. But this doesn't suggest really that free trade explains it all. It reminds us, if we intervene, there will be a loss. we will cut down our income potential, and we should have very good reason to do it. This is the classical theory in terms of developed countries bringing up prices. That's the EU policy. To the left, that's the situation of the tariff. If we raise the tariff, we have higher domestic prices. That's what we intended to do in Europe. What we still intend to do in countries like Japan, in South Korea, or Switzerland. If you ever go to Switzerland and want to buy some food, I can recommend to take a food bag to Switzerland from Ukraine, because it is so expensive due to this kind of still existing protectionist policy. That's the story of export subsidies of the EU. I guess no longer relevant. That's the old story that we still have to a certain extent, but the situation since 15 years ago has changed dramatically. Your story is a different one. You are exporters, you are importers, a little bit pygmy, but not really much, at least something. But you are not really talking about protection for some markets, so I might ask you whether you might probably do. You are talking about what to do if you want to tax export. That's what you did in the past. When the prices have gone up, you either took an export control on the quantity, or you taxed your exports, and whatever you do, that brings down the domestic price below the world market price, and that, of course, is bad for producers and good for consumers. So this is a point of discussion of the past, and what Ukraine will do in the future, we'll see whether there's a public debate on this, what Ukraine should do for whatever reason, how to intervene in trade, I think is still an interesting issue. Let me summarize a little bit the idea for your country. I think there is no serious doubt about agricultural trade and trade orientation, so which is different from my country where I'm coming from. We have to see that any trade intervention somehow is a taxation or subsidization of groups, either producers or consumers, wherever you go, in what situation. So the distribution and implications of a trade intervention is a very important issue for policy analysis. Welfare and distribution aspects I already mentioned. There is some nice saying of Mr. Friedman, one of the famous or bloody, whatever you like, free trade economist or liberal economist, who said there is no thing like a free meal. And with respect to our question, that can be translated very simply, also in terms of agriculture. If government intervenes in on what the government does. And the story is quite simple. Whatever the trade intervention is, whatever policies are applied, if producers have a higher price than the world market price, they are taxed. And to all its groups in the economy. If it wants somehow, it has a nice and higher price than the world market price for producers, and have an appropriate consumer price, which might be lower than the world market price, then you must not even have a model. The answer is very simple. The budget explodes. The budget goes up, budget expenditure. That's the old story of socialist agriculture, who had this idea of nice agricultural policy. Simply, somebody has to pay the bill. There is no such a thing like a free meal. I like this saying very much because it shows very much. If we talk about trade, if we talk about free trade, you might have policy ideas, whatever you have, but if you have them, you have to explain what that means in terms of welfare and distribution. Still to be discussed, I mentioned that already, is what was the issue of export constraints of Ukraine in the future. We are talking about what policy options arise for a country based on comparative advantage. There are other policy areas which are important, and I personally like to categorize national policy making in 3 fields. That's some simplification, but I think it helps. It helps to understand that if we want to do something in a national economy and the agriculture sector, what are your options and what are the implications? We talked about price and trade policies. That's what we did just in the slide just before. And as you can see, there are 2 other important policy areas for any country, basically. One is institutional policies, and institutional policies is setting up institutions. Institutions are rules for economics, but also for social life, for human life. And the institutions, they affect production and trade, they affect economic activities. And so, if you set the institutions that could reflect the production cost of an economy, and that could affect trade costs. And that is very important, a very important issue for your country. Because you are talking about what kind of proper institutions should be set in your economy. You are talking about transaction costs, as we say in economics. All this shows if we have proper institutions that will ease production, that will reduce production costs. In terms of economics, that is a welfare, that is an economic goal, that's a shift to the right. And the same thing happens if you take money. We call it fiscal or budget policy. If the government spends money for certain activities. And this for any economy, for any agricultural sector, is the most important issue, which is always the case. But the idea basically is the same. If you spend money, if there's a proposal, we should diversify the economy. I would say, okay, that's nice, might be a nice objective, but what are the implications? Does diversification mean? How will we impact the production cost for the quarrel about diversification? Because the policy doesn't have an impact. If you have several policy options, if you can support an imported commodity or an exported commodity to improve diversification, that might have different shift effects. And of course, one should do something that has the most important shift effect. So what we discussed this morning, it's a nice discussion. I liked it very much. I was impressed by the engagement of the young students. But it's the first step. The first step for policy making. It doesn't mean to have this objective. One has to show what the implications are. And to show what the implications are is a task for us economists to show what the implications are of production costs and trade costs. That is the second point. So, from an analytical point of view, I don't want to bother you. But if you want to include some economists, if you have a proposal for national policy making, if you think we should something do for food security or for sustainability or whatever you have, my analytical thinking would be, okay, there are 3 options. What do you propose? And I would ask you, what are the implications? Let's make a calculation and let's see what that means in terms of the objectives that you pursue. So this would be the framework for policy making that offers itself once one takes competitive advantage, not as the best policy world, but as a starting point for thinking, and that is different. So free trade is not the ultimate objective of what we should do in policy making, and that is very often misunderstood. I think, no, it's a baseline. It's a baseline for starting whether and which policy intervention should actually be pursued. And here real world starts, because many things could be pursued beyond trade. It must be reflected, it must be discussed. And here I come to my third point of the presentation, just the selection of some points that might be relevant based on the idea of free trade. I don't want to question that. If in Germany somebody says we want to close down the economy to produce our protein ourselves, I simply don't understand this idea, because I think that's a really wrong starting point to go for certain objectives. If one says, okay, what can we support if we can ease production costs and so on based on free trade, then I would say, okay, let's think about this. So in my view, there are many things that must be discussed, but one shouldn't forget that somehow any trade intervention would just solve the problem. It wouldn't. What are the relevant issues for Ukraine? If you allow, I will address 7 points. The first one is, should, and if yes, how should Ukraine react to rising and or fluctuating world market prices? You are an open economy to a certain extent in last years. You have intervened in times of high prices and to tax producers in the past. What really do you want to do? What is the policy concept for the future if there are unstable world market prices? Should be some kind of stabilization policy in the country. There are many ideas which are discussed in international policy debates, how proper stabilization policies might be implemented. So this would be an issue that could be discussed. Do you want to fall back to interventions in exports if prices go up? I don't know. The pros and cons have extensively debated in the past. So one question, I think a very important question is, as not only for your country, for any country, for the US and for Europe, which are open economies also in agriculture right now, is what do we do with fluctuating world market prices, with fluctuating agricultural production at home and internationally, and what could be a proper stabilization policy. We are currently debating a lot about the future reform of the common agricultural policy, and issues around stabilization, insurance, and all these kind of things have very high priority on these issues. If you are exporting, export insurances and all these kind of things, of topics that the US have exercised since years, these are really important topics, and a lot would have to be discussed, I think, with respect to this topic in your country. Second point, cutting down transaction costs in production and trade remains a key policy. I want to be brief on this. You all know, as a former so-called fishing country, the Ukraine still has to struggle with high transaction costs in production and trade, with bureaucratic burdens and logistic problems, with standards which are not fulfilled, that export conditions are not met, and all these kind of things. You know that much, much better than I do. And this, of course, still is restricting gains from trade. And this is really a very important issue. Analytically speaking, these dynamic effects, the reduction of transaction costs, can have high welfare impacts, which are much higher than any kind of trade intervention in a static world. So since the world is changing, and since a country like yours, with increasing productivity, with transaction cost barriers and all these kind of things, that is really acknowledged. I think people discuss a lot of this, but there are still a lot of things to do that might support this kind of policy field. Third, you know that you have running your national policy under the framework of the free trade agreement with the EU. And I think the basic advantage of the agreement is the adjustment to international and of course now to EU standards, because this is supported by the EU partly, but also financed partly by the EU, and this might help, I think, to cut down transaction cost of trade. And if this is a perspective for Ukraine, which I think is the most important perspective, I think this is the most crucial part of the free trade agreement that you have signed and that you have implemented. So the key of the free trade agreement is to cut down transaction costs. But there's another element which has been debated a lot in this country, also in the EU, and these are the famous tariff rate quotas that you will know. I can be short on that. That means that the EU grants for a certain quantity of imports from Ukraine textile imports. So this means the EU still protects on some markets. We are not liberalized, because if we were to have world market prices, if we wouldn't have import duties, there would be no tariff rate quota. That wouldn't make sense. You would have a quota, but there wouldn't be a benefit of it. So this is one thing of the story. In the present system, according to the implementation of the tariff rate quota, this means there's a benefit. We call it transfer. And the question, of course, is, I don't know whether we have these discussions in this country, that it is a policy issue how to use these transfers, the quota, and who benefits, which producers benefit. The big ones, the small ones, which region, or the government. Can the other government allocate a certain system, for instance, for allocating these quotas in order to capture the rent of this, which is not done. So far, I think these are policy issues in terms of economic analysis. This is a simple, straightforward thing. We can calculate, as far as I know, nobody so far ever did that in this country, at least not publicly. We can calculate, if you export to the EU from Ukraine, you get a higher price due to the tax in the EU than if you export to China. Then you get the free on board price in Odessa for these. So there's a rent, there's a transfer, but what to do with the rent and how it could be captured and used, I think that's a very important policy issue, which so far should be discussed a little bit more in detail. Point 4. A specific point in case is the value-added tax system in your country. The value-added tax, economically speaking, is a typical consumer tax, normally. But then such a consumer tax should be implemented if it's raised from the producer. Then the producer will get the market price if he sells his products at home. And if he sells the product abroad, if he exports, he will get the world market price. So he should get an export refund if the value-added tax is raised on the location, local farm from the producer. If there is no export refund, then we have a new system. And the new system is the consumer tax, the value-added tax, is supplemented by an export tax. And the export tax, as we well know, an export tax brings down the domestic price. Economically speaking, it's a very tricky system that you once in the past have implemented, but it simply means that it was depressing domestic price level due to the export tax. And the consumers had to pay that, but from a lower domestic market price. If you compare that to no intervention, this boils down the whole story that the tax system, as I described now, is not a consumer tax, but a producer tax. And then, of course, the question is, what will you change? If you change the system, if you refund exports, what you do for some commodities, but as I understand not all of them. What will you do in the future? Will you increase the refund rate or fully refund, or won't you do it? Will you change the value-added tax rate? All this has very different implications in the markets for bread in your country and in producer prices and consumer prices, and I think it's worth to be considered. By the way, we are discussing and analyzing these issues with the Agriculture Ministry, because we are talking the trade project on the trade framework for national policy making. And as I understand, this is a key important issue for policy making in the future of the country, looking or just imagining that a change in the system, whatever you do, has clear distributional implications. It's a tax revenue that will be affected, it's the taxation of consumers and the taxation of producers that will be affected. But I think this should be discussed publicly in open debates and in policy making, and that was my point 4. My point 5, maybe a little bit artificial, if I ask the question, should the structure of agricultural production and trade be changed? What does it mean? Agricultural exports are heavily driven by primary commodities in Ukraine, as you know. We have just discussed it also in the agricultural policy debate of this morning, that there are claims, and I think many of us support this idea, to enhance production and trade of processed commodities is a good thing for policy making to keep value added at home. That maybe Ukraine will still import agricultural commodities, few, but some. It might be nice to cut down the imports of these commodities to save foreign exchange payments, to make the balance of payments even better. But this story is not that simple. And economic theory tells us a very clear picture. If we only look at today's imports or exports, so the heavily load of primary commodities which are exported, the current import and export situation doesn't tell us anything on where to invest and how to change production and trade. So there is a lot to be discussed, but if there are proposals, for instance, that we should invest, that we should spend money, public money, to enhance the value-added change for whatever it is, for picnic or other things, or whatever you might imagine, well, this is really not a trade problem, that is an investment problem. And we should make an impact analysis or investment analysis, and if such an investment has a big impact on productivity, on competitive advantage of the new commodities that might be exported, that's fine. But if there's no impact, or if the impact is financed too heavily with public money, then it's a wastage of resources. So again, the idea to change the pattern of exports and the trade structure is a nice thing, but it's a first thought, it's an objective that would have to be analyzed instead of believed and just stopped here for policy making. So a lot more of thinking is necessary in terms of economics. That's investment, or if you say economics cost-benefit analysis, which is standard theory, but one would have to look at this, whether some proposal really makes sense, or again, if it's a wastage of resources. Point 6. Does macroeconomic adjustment of this country, which has heavily suffered, you all do much better know than I do, does this require supplementary agriculture and rural policy? We talked about rural development. My colleague is now giving a lecture on rural development policies, experiences from Germany, and what we had over there. We had a seminar on the Agro Expo, or how's it called, on this. So there are first thinkings of this in this country. There is no doubt, just to give an example, that the enormous devaluation of the Vietnam, coming back to this example, favors producers and burns consumers, and pushes production and the balance of trade. That's what in economics we call the so-called exchange mechanism. And this is what economics is about this kind of policy making. How can or should the adjustment process be accompanied by appropriate policies? In the 70s, we discussed these kind of things under the term structured adjustment policies with the World Bank and the IMF context, for instance. Adjustment to the social phase, what does it mean? In our question, in terms of agriculture policy making, it means should agriculture sector in the future, a policy for rural areas and the poor, maybe in these areas. If you look at European agriculture policy, most of it is social policy. Nobody says so publicly, but in principle it is. And this is a question that I think needs to require some debate also in your country. Seventh and last point. I mentioned in my example, in my illustration, the idea of sustainable agricultural development, and I would like to come back to that. That is an important issue, adjustment to climate change, and all these kind of issues that we discussed, saving natural resources. There is much to clarify, or much is left for policy making beyond trade, undoubtedly. And this is certainly true for a sustainable or sustainable agricultural development. But this is not, first of all, a matter of thinking of trade intervention. The perspective instead is to reduce external costs for the environment. That's what our economists call it. We don't have only private costs in economic activities, but social costs or environmental costs. And if we want to do something for sustainability, we have to look at these external costs. And we should carefully try to adjust production systems. We should possibly integrate these non-economic costs, these social or environmental costs, into the pricing system for that theory. Nobody does it so far, neither the EU nor the US or any other country in the world. But I think we would have to think into this direction. But trade intervention certainly is not the first best option. And this is my last point, my last remark. So if we say sustainable agriculture, most important, this means we said somehow to cut down trade. This could mean turning away from trade, or even a fall back into autarkic thinking, not you, but some people in my country. I think that's a totally wrong perspective of policy making, a total misunderstanding of such a drastic neglect of competitive advantage. Final remark, the focus of my presentation, just 3 points. My third point was on challenges for national agriculture policy making in the Ukraine, just a selection, trade-oriented topics. Certainly in these Trump days, it would be worthwhile to look at the trade policy making also from an international perspective. This is a different story, a nice story, an important story, but not now. Not now for our discussion, maybe on other occasions. Just to remind you, they are celebrating these days in Geneva the 10th anniversary of Ukraine's WTO membership. I hope you have been aware of that. 10th anniversary just these days. Congratulations from my side too. I think the role of this organization cannot be underestimated, taking care that international trade is governed by law and not by power. Let's hope that it stays this way. And let's see what comes out with this Trump intervention on the steel market, and what the discussion, and what the scholars, what the pleas in the WTO context might bring to us. I'm very happy that we have this and just don't fall back in old-fashioned policies of a one-by-one, eye-by-eye intervention in certain fact issues where that led to, we have seen 100 years ago and many times in history. Thank you very much for your attention. Let's just get very briefly summarized. My plea is not for free trade. Sometimes I'm misunderstood. My plea is, let's think that we can make use of division of labor because we are better off with this. You know that. Nobody believes that. My country, some people believe it. Not so few people, I guess. I think that's totally wrong. So let's start with this idea, and then let's think what proper policy making really means based on this, and let's not misuse trade interventions for not understanding proper policy making, which is there's much to be done beyond trade, and this is not the position of this point. Thanks a lot again, and I hope we have a nice discussion. I look forward for your comments and your questions. Thank you very much. So how do we proceed? Just Olga Lasse, do you want to moderate a little bit or here?
Yes,